Hello and welcome to Fine is a four-letter word. My guest today, Erica Anderson Rooney. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Lori, how are you? I'm so excited to be here.
I am excited to have this conversation, and I know it's going to be a good one. So let's jump right in
Let's
with
do
the
it.
first question I like to ask, and that is, what were the values and beliefs that were instilled in you as you were growing up that contributed to who you've become?
Oh my gosh, the values and beliefs that were instilled in me. When I hear that question, Lori, the first thing that comes to me is that education is important. So my mother always taught me you need to go to school, you need to get good grades, so that you can get a good job so you can support yourself. So that was one. Another one is never rely on a man to support you. That was number two, right? Always be financially independent. And then I think too, there was a lot inadvertently that came in. It wasn't exactly those messages that you think you're teaching your children, like be a good person,
Yeah.
be kind, be generous, but it's what you see and observe. And when I think about what I saw and observed as a kid, that led me to think, believe, and act the way that I did was that you needed to be at the top of your game all the time. So always show up, always put a smile on your face, be a good girl, do the right thing. And then I think the other one was that alcohol solves a lot of problems. You can drink when you're happy, you can drink when you're sad, but it will be with you if you are struggling. And I mean, that'll segue into some of what I call the sticky floors and the things that really led me to not be so fine. But those, I
Mhm.
think, were a lot of the actions and the beliefs and the thoughts that were instilled upon me as a kid. That's a great question.
Thank you. Was your father around?
Yes, he was. I mean, so I grew up in a divorced household. My parents got divorced when I was about 2 years old, but they stayed in the same town. So I spent half of the week with my dad and half of the week with my mom. And this is one of the things that I'm uncovering. It gave me a great gift, but it also was a very big hindrance and a very big piece of who I was because, I mean, my parents got divorced because they didn't get along, right? Because they're two very different people. Best thing they could have done for
Mhm.
themselves, right? But as a young kid, they then went their separate ways. And I had two very different households that had very different beliefs, very different expectations, and very different rules. So, Lori, that really led me to act one way in one home and act a different way in a different home. And it led me to be a chameleon and to always put other people
That's the word I
first.
was just thinking when you were talking. I'm like, chameleon. Yes.
And girl, it's great. I can fit into any room. I can schmooze with any person and I can hang out with anyone, right? What that makes me, though, is very agreeable. It does not make me authentic. And that was an area that
Mm.
I struggled because I thought that it was so important to fit in. I thought that it was so important to be what was expected of me and fit in this box. And that if I was anything different than what would fit into that box, that I would not be loved and accepted and I would not thrive. And so I just learned to always be agreeable, to always fit in and blend in, but to never really truly be my authentic self.
Mhm. Yeah, I think a lot of people in our generation especially went through that
Yeah.
and now are uh figuring it out. Like, okay, but who am I authentically? Like if
Well,
nobody
and
told me who to
also,
be, who would I be?
yeah, and recognizing that being who you are doesn't necessarily make people like you more or less, Because what I'm
Right.
talking about, Lori, and I'll give you a very tangible example, is it was to the point for me that if you asked me, hey, do you like country music? It did not matter if I did or not. I would tell you that I did if I thought you did, because then we would
Mhm.
have some commonality. So I was always just searching for that connection. And let me tell you too, it has taken me years of therapy to get to that point, but it is a very big piece of who I am, and like understanding that I have this innate need to be liked and to be accepted. Now that I know and I understand that about myself, I can see why I make certain decisions or why I respond the way I do in certain situations. And now I'm able to like say, okay, Erica, are you really being who you want to be, who you say you are, or are you being who you think they need you to be? And then I can
Mhm.
pivot based on that.
Has that ability also made you more empathetic to other people, or more in, let me say different, more in tune with other people?
Mm, absolutely think so.
Because you
I
had to
do.
learn how to read them in order to do what you thought they would want you to do.
Yes, and I think that that has been part of the gift is being able to really go deep with people quickly because I can kind of identify where their brains are going and what they're doing, which is great, but unless I'm also then reciprocating with my authenticity, it doesn't do me any good. But it's been an
Mhm.
interesting thing to navigate, especially in adulthood, and especially when you really step into like the personal growth space and you start getting curious about who am I really and what do I enjoy and why do I do what I do.
Yeah.
So it's been really interesting.
What was the pivotal moment, if there was, a specific moment, or the pivotal time in your life that opened your eyes to, "Oh, this is how I am and it's not serving me."
You know what? I think I've seen that sprinkled throughout my life where I would have told one person, yeah, I love country music, but I might have told somebody else I didn't. And then I'm like, oh shit, I can't remember what I said, what I didn't say, what's going on. Like, and I just started knowing
They're all
those.
in the same room going,
They're all
"Erica
in the same
doesn't
room.
like
What the
country
hell do
music."
I
"Yes, she
do?
does."
Yeah. And I started recognizing like, okay, this is actually a little tough. They talk about it, it's so much easier to tell the truth because you only have to remember the truth. Whereas when you tell lies, you have
Right.
to remember all of those things. And that's what I kind of came down to is just I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. And then I wasn't even comfortable in the spaces I was putting myself in because I wasn't authentically stepping into those spaces. So it is one of those things. Those I don't want to say there was a pivotal point, especially when it came to that. It was more of like this slow roll of thunder realization that what I was
Mm,
doing wasn't working.
mhm. Okay. Uh, and when you finally, or when you did recognize, "This is what I'm doing," what did you do? Like, did you start reading books? Were you listening to podcasts? Did you
Girl,
immediately
I
call a
still do it
therapist? What
sometimes.
Well,
It
sure.
Yeah. So for
But I
me,
mean, when you, because it's, I don't think it sounds like you weren't necessarily aware that you were doing it for most of the early part of your life. Like, you were just doing it because this is your mode of operating,
yep.
and
And I think
you were
for a
doing it
long time,
unconsciously, but then you became conscious of it.
yeah, I think it was one of those things, Lori, that it built over time. And I
Mhm.
recognized and I kind of knew I was doing that, but I didn't think it was that big of a deal. Whereas underneath all that, the unhappiness was building and it was slowly
Mhm.
building up
Mhm.
and it was kind of starting to seep out into these different areas of my life. And I talked a little bit about this earlier, but I alluded to drinking solves all problems, right? And so when
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
started becoming more and more unhappy and more, not living this authentic life and not speaking up for what I valued and what I cared about and what made me happy. And I was constantly pleasing all of those people around me. I would drink to deal with it. And it numbed
Mhm.
the edge. It took the edge off a little bit. It made it less of a big deal of like, okay, if I don't really want to go eat at that restaurant, it's not a big deal. I'll just have a glass of wine. It's all fine. Right. And that's the beauty and the tricky thing about alcohol is it is meant to numb you out, right? So it did a great job
Mhm.
of that, which got me to a different level for a very long time because I was like, okay, those things bug me, but you know what? I'll just have a glass of wine. It's not a big deal. Well, then one glass of wine started turning into two, which started turning into three, which started turning into a bottle. And that is a very slow roll that quickly turns into a landslide that if you don't stop and
Yeah.
pay attention. And so for me, there was one night where we'd had the family over. I'd had a wonderful evening. I was probably annoyed about a few things. And I thought, I'm just going to have a couple more glasses of wine because this is just too much. And Lori, when I tell you, like the next day I woke up and I couldn't remember what I had said, I couldn't remember, what fight my husband and I had gotten into, I recognized like this is not working for me anymore because I am a very educated, very smart person and I do good work and I have a good heart. But when I drink wine and I use that to numb my unhappiness, I become somebody else that I don't even know who she is. And it's not
Mhm.
the person that I want to be. It's not the wife. It's not the mom. It wasn't the executive that I wanted to be. So when I was kind of hitting my own version of rock bottom, right? Because everybody's got to hit that. I realized I had to make a change. And that was when I said, okay, like, I don't know what the change like really has to be, but I know I can't drink right now. And it wasn't like this, I'm going to be
Mhm.
sober for forever. I'm going to, do all these things. But I just said, I know that this is one thing that is causing problems in my life and it's not fixing anything. So I'm going to start with that. And I started with just
Mhm.
giving up alcohol. And that started changing things. Not immediately, it took some time. But once that kind of wine induced haze lifted, and once I was able to respond to other people's questions and inquiries with what I truly felt, I was able to recognize, wow, I've been keeping all of that hidden for so long. Or I haven't been voicing my opinions because I've been so worried about what everybody else thought or wanted. And I started speaking up for myself. And what I will tell you, Lori, is that is also hard because if you have not been one to speak up for yourself and speak your truth and be authentically you, all of those other people who've been with you for so long, they also don't know what that person is or who that person looks like. So they're also relearning you. And it can come across as friction for a while. And like I say all the time, we had to do a little bit of troubleshooting in my marriage because I was stepping into a different version of me, and that was a
Well,
version
I
that
was
was,
gonna ask you.
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna ask you because you were already married when you came to the realization that you had not been an authentic version of
Mhm.
yourself. So now you're married to somebody who thinks you are some
Whatever I
version
am.
that is
Yeah.
not who you are, and like, yeah, how did you keep it, because you're still married to
Yes,
that
still
same
married.
person,
We are
and
still married.
I
Well,
imagine that was
it
I
was
was gonna say,
hard.
I imagine that was not, yeah, I don't know, difficult was the word I was looking for, but certainly challenging.
Yeah, I think difficult is a fine word to use for that because it is kind of like it was difficult for me because I'm trying to figure out myself. It was difficult for my partner
Mhm.
because he's like, what the hell is going on? Quite honestly, most
Like, who are
people,
you?
yeah,
Yeah.
people who are always authentic, it's hard for them to understand why somebody wouldn't be authentic. But my husband and I,
Mhm.
we come from two polarizing opposite scenarios. Like his parents have been married for 50 something years. I grew up in split households, like totally different. And so he didn't understand that about me. But as he started to understand more, as I started to understand more about myself, I could share those things with him. And when I shared with him that, like, hey, I spent my childhood bouncing back and forth, code switching essentially who I was from my
Yeah.
mom's house to my dad's house, I was like, that's really hard when you're doing that at 3 years old to even have the ability to be authentic, because you're just trying
Mhm.
so hard to fit in and keep the peace. And once he understood that, he recognized that I needed to have a little bit more room to grow myself and figure myself out. But he is that kind of man that was very committed and like, you know what? Like I'm here for the ride. This is what I signed up for. So
Well, my question for him, I guess, is, did you, like, what were you expecting was going to happen? Like, because you could have come out like like you're a totally different person. Like, wait, that's not what I married or who I married, and I don't
yeah.
know if I can. I don't know that I still like this person, I guess, is where I was thinking.
Well, and I'm a big fan of like when you are married, you are either growing together or you're growing apart, right? Because we're
Hmm.
always growing and changing, whether you agree with that statement or
Right,
not.
a hundred
Like the
percent.
only thing that stays the same is change. And so I think he really recognized, like, okay, I can also meet her where she's at and I can do a little bit of the work myself and we can see what happens. But we both kind of approached it with this open mindset of like, all right, we're both going to try here. We're both going to figure it out because also too, and the whole premises of this podcast is fine as a 4-letter word. Like neither of us were fine. Neither of us
Hmm.
were fine. And we both knew that we both had to make some changes in order for this institutional marriage thing we call life, whatever, to work.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he kind of didn't know what he was going to get. I also didn't know what I was going to get. It was kind of like we're both showing up here. But when you
Yeah.
remove this like hazy alcohol induced, fog, it just opens up so much more room for possibility and potential and understanding and growth. Whereas before I was just dampening everything down and quiet everything down, which all you're doing there is shoving it to the back. It doesn't go away. And eventually it comes
Right.
out.
Yes. Yes. It's like one of my past podcast guests, like back in the early episodes, probably first 20, she had talked about it's like holding a beach ball underwater,
Yeah.
and you can hold it for a little while, but at some point it's going to pop up and hit you in the face.
That is a great visual, especially when you're talking
Right.
just, you know, like, because you see, it's like we think we can shove these things way down. And to be clear, I did for many, many years, but eventually it's going to slap you in the face.
Yes. Yes. And so I think that's really cool that you both approached it as kind of an adventure. Like, let's go see what happens, where we come out here and discover together.
The most freeing thing for me is I think when people are married, you feel like I have to do this and I have to make this work. And and to me, that just feels very overbearing and it doesn't feel very free.
Hmm.
So when I like to think about my marriage, I like to think of it as we both have a choice to stay and hang out, like it is a choice though. And
Hmm.
I have to make it so that he wants to stay here and he has to make it so that I want to stay here. So how do we do that together? And until one
How
of
do we
us,
do that together and as authentic versions of ourselves? Because you were doing that, but you were doing it at your own expense of not being authentic.
yeah. Well, and again, came down to a lot of the communication. And
Hmm.
it's interesting too, because you have to recognize, especially when you're talking about these quantum leap types of personal growth and like really becoming the next level of you, is not everybody's going to go with you, and
Right.
that might mean leaving your spouse behind, your partner behind, somebody that you love behind. It might, it might not,
Right. Right.
but we're all growing and changing at different rates, right? And I hope it works out for the rest of time, but I also believe that we both have this choice to show up and that we both have to be willing partners to show up to keep our relationship where we want it to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And not just partnerships, not just marriage partners, but friendships as well. And careers, because
All the
you
things.
also made a career change.
Oh my gosh. Well, let's dial it a little bit back too, because if we look at this through the lens of I walked away from one thing, alcohol, and like how that changed my life. That one thing, I let go of one thing and it expanded my mindset. It helped my relationship. And then it gave me more time, Lori, because when you
Hmm.
don't drink, there's a lot of free time you find, right? You're not hungover, things aren't hazy, your brain is functioning the way it's supposed to. And I just found myself with all this time and I was like, well, what am I going to do with that? And with that time, I started doing executive coaching and I basically got a certification thinking one day this will help me with my job. Well, once I started coaching people, I recognized like, wow, this is really lighting me up. This is bringing me joy. All this crap in corporate America. And like I was a chief people officer. So I was doing a lot of strategy and employee relations issues and organizational development. And it was just sucking the life out of me. But, we got them golden
Hmm.
handcuffs, Lori. So we love to stay around for those golden
Yeah,
handcuffs because we think money
that's
buys
right.
happiness. And money, it doesn't buy happiness, but it does buy a lot of things that can get you happiness. But
Yes.
what I'm
Right.
here to say is when you get those moments in your life that you're like, wow, this is bringing me more excitement and more joy and more just lightness is the word I'm thinking, more lightness and more energy,
Hmm.
lean into those things because I did start to lean into those things. And then, Lori, from that, I wrote a freaking book. Like, I took all of these conversations that I'd been having with my coaching practices and with women on my podcast. And then I wrote a book called Glass Ceilings and Sticky Floors. And then it's just like my life has taken a complete left turn to where I have now fully exited corporate because I knew who I was, because I was no longer okay with just being fine. I wanted to be lit up.
Hmm.
I wanted to be joyful. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to know that when I get to the end of my life, that I feel really damn good about the decisions I made. And because I had started leaning into that authenticity, 2-3 years ago, Lori, I was able to see that in my reflection and lean into that and make the leap to walk away from corporate. And that's not a decision I take lightly. And what I will tell you is I know I'm doing the right thing because it is an equal mix of excitement and fear. And so I'm just
Yeah.
leaning into it
Yeah.
and I'm going all in, but I can't tell you like how truly aligned I feel with that decision.
And I know that you had posted on LinkedIn recently about some things that happened on your last day in corporate that solidified or confirmed that you were moving in the right direction.
Hell
And
yes, girl.
that's so exciting. I have two questions for you though. One, do you think that people can find that joy and happiness within a corporation?
I do. I think they can. And I think some people love it, right? It wasn't for me.
Mhm.
But here's the thing, it was for me for a long time, Lori. Like I really did love
Mhm.
going to work and collaborating and doing all those things. And it worked for me until it didn't. But back to that whole
Yeah.
idea of everything is changing and growing. You're either growing with it or you're not. And I had to have this real conversation with myself of, have you outgrown this place, Erica? And the answer was yes.
Right. I like that phrase of outgrowing something, and that we don't fault children for outgrowing their clothes because that just happens naturally, right? But sometimes we can fault ourselves or other people around us for outgrowing whatever, if it's a career or a relationship or whatever it is, because we want them to stay the same because that makes us feel comfortable.
100%. And I have this succulent that I keep in my bathroom, and it's a real plant. And I'm not really great at keeping plants alive, but this one has been living for a couple years. And as I was getting ready to exit corporate, I was looking at this succulent and it was growing a succulent out of the succulent. So it was like this long
Mm,
stem and, it was growing towards the sunlight, but it looked ridiculous because it was a succulent on top of a succulent. And that to me was the perfect visual of growing and being nurtured in a place, but then also recognizing it's time to be repotted.
mm, nice. Okay, my other question goes back to your whole story about not drinking anymore.
Yeah.
Would you have considered yourself an alcoholic?
Back then, no, absolutely not. I did not like the term alcoholic. I still honestly don't like the term alcoholic because I feel like it gives the power away and I feel like it slaps a label on somebody for
Mhm.
doing something. And then, like, again, that substance is intended to get you addicted. Like, that is the whole chemical
Mhm.
makeup, that it is doing what it was designed to do. But for me
Mhm.
to call myself an alcoholic, it felt very unempowering. It felt very shameful. It felt very blameful. And that alone was halting my growth. So I
Yeah.
just flipped the narrative, Lori, and I said, you know what? Like, I'm not even going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. I'm just somebody who doesn't drink, right? I also don't drink
Yeah.
coffee, Lori. I just don't like coffee. It's a problem. I know. But nobody calls me like a coffee holic kind of person. Like there's no shame associated with it. There's no,
Right.
meetings or groups. And that's the thing. I didn't go to meetings or groups. I didn't do any of that. I just said, you know what? I'm
I
going to
was gonna
remove
ask
this.
that too. Uh-huh.
Yeah. I said, I'm going to remove this from my life. And I'm actually going to get curious about why I do what I do. And so I started
Mhm.
asking myself all of these questions. And I was like, well, I really do believe that alcohol helps me sleep. Like that was a true belief I had, a core belief. And then when I broke it
Mhm.
down and I did the research and I looked into it, it was like, does alcohol help me sleep or does it just make me pass out? And then I wake up at 3 a.m. with crazy anxiety because I don't know what I said or did. And I'm sweating and I'm nervous. And it's like, that's what was happening. I wasn't falling asleep better. I wasn't getting a better night's sleep. I was doing all that mess. And so I started
Yeah.
asking myself all of those questions when I thought there was a benefit to alcohol, right? Like, does it make me have more
Right.
fun when I go out? And I was like, well, feels like it a little bit. And I was like, or Did that night continue? And then I made a fool out of myself and spilled red wine on my favorite sweater. Probably more like that. And I just started
Mm-hmm.
getting curious. And that curiosity, the same curiosity, Lori, that led me to recognize that I wasn't being authentic, was the same curiosity that led me to recognize that my actions with pouring another glass of wine was not actually benefiting me.
Mm. I love the your getting curious and asking yourself questions, because I think the key takeaway in this part of the conversation is about asking yourself questions, whether it has to do with alcohol, and is alcohol serving me in the way that I think it is, helping me sleep, helping me be more social, whatever it is, asking yourself questions to uncover the truth, and asking yourself questions about any situation that you think is benefiting you. Is hanging out with this group of friends serving me? Is, I don't know, eating red meat serving me? Whatever it is,
Whatever it is, yes.
getting really curious and bold enough to ask yourself the questions, or to start the investigation into what is really true, and it's what is really true for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It
Two
may not be
powerful
true for you.
questions. Right.
Right.
Two powerful questions that I always encourage people to ask are, is this idea, thought, belief, action helpful? And is it true? Because that kind
Mhm.
of goes with any limiting belief, any limiting mindset, any action that you are doing or taking. So if we look back to my chameleon actions, right? Is this action helpful, that I am lying about these, seemingly unimportant things to form a connection? And it's like, well, it is a little helpful at first. People like me. I form that
Mhm.
instant connection, but then you keep playing it out. Okay, so now they think you're this and they invite you to a country concert. You go, and it's like, well, I just told them I loved it. I kind of have to. And then we start to see that it's not so helpful, right? And then
Mhm.
that's where we can say, like, okay, we can see it's not helpful. And then number two, is it true? Obviously, if I'm lying about something, it ain't true, right? But a lot of
Mhm.
those
Mhm.
limiting beliefs and the mindsets, those are all the things that we tell ourselves, and they're not true. People who struggle with
Right.
perfectionism or imposter syndrome, any of those, it's not true, but we believe it to be. And so when you kind of get curious and you peel back the layers of the onion, you can recognize the actual truth. And then you can start to have those conversations with yourself and pivot your thoughts and pivot your actions and make a different choice.
What would you say to somebody who says, "Well, I believe that it's true," but they're not sure if,
You
like,
got to
how
keep
do they
asking
you
questions.
just
You got
said
to,
unpeel the
yeah,
onion.
it's like the
Uh-huh.
question beneath the question. So again, like if we go back to my authenticity, is it true that it's helping me form a bond with them? Yeah, that is true. It does help me form a
Mhm.
bond with them. But then what? You know? And
Right.
then you have to go, okay, well, now they have a bond with somebody that isn't true, and something that's not actually
Right.
happening. So then what? So you just have to kind of keep peeling and keep working until you see the flip side of the coin.
Yeah, I'm asking that question because I think a lot of times people have been programmed to believe something is true about themselves or about other people even. When you look at, prejudices, for
Yeah.
example, people have been programmed to believe that what they've been taught, that belief is true. And so it's a matter of, is it true? Is it true? Is it true? How do
I'm a big
you
fan of
how do I was
picking.
going to say, how do you discern
Yeah.
discern between what is actually true and what you've been programmed to believe that may or may not be true, and whose voice is telling you that it's true? Because, for example, a lot of people have been told when they were kids that they weren't, they were stupid, or they never amount to something. And so they believe that is true. It's not true, but because it's somebody else's belief, it's not theirs.
Here's the thing, you are only in control or responsible for two things: your beliefs and your actions. That's it. You can't control
Hmm.
anyone else's belief about you or the world, nor can you control their actions. So, whenever you start to really spiral on those things, or you find yourself stuck in what you think is a hard and fast truth, look around you, and you said the first thing, like, who is saying this? Whose voice are you hearing? Because often when you dig deep, you'll recognize, wow, I don't really believe that. Maybe that's
Mhm.
just the voice of my father or my grandfather or a teacher or whoever, that's in my
Mhm.
ear. Let me actually get curious and think about, what do I really believe helps me with this
Yeah.
or that. And again, it's all individualized. It's all so personal. And I
Mhm.
think we just so often look for this blanket answer to every question we've ever had, when we are all these individual souls running around a planet that is on a, it's a rock in the middle of space, and everything we know about the universe fits in a thimble. Okay. So there's so much we don't
Right.
know. You really got to go deep and look in on yourself to see, what is true for me. What do I know
Yeah.
to be true? Or what do I think is true that I want to question again? And one of the things I always work on with my clients is picking the pivot, picking the reframe from, I can't do this, to I haven't done it yet. From,
Mm.
they're not going to like me unless I agree with them, to, there's 8 point something billion people in this world. If they don't like me, somebody else will,
Yeah.
and being okay with that. I mean, look, there's a lot of therapy work that could go into this whole thing, whichever way we look at it, right? So everybody get yourself a good therapist, but start getting curious and asking yourself the questions. That is the best place to start.
Yes. Curiosity did not kill the cat.
No, it probably gave it all 9 lives.
Exactly. That's what kept it alive, like,
Alive
and
for so damn
stimulated.
long. Yeah.
I love it. Well, you have given us so many good key takeaways from this conversation. I love it. Before we go, speaking of country music, what I'm going to guess that your hype song is not a country song. What is it? What is your song?
Here's what's so crazy is, because I did grow up as a chameleon, you will find anything on my iPod, all the way from country music to like some gangster thug rap. So like, you will find everything and anything in between, because I ended up liking all of it. But right now my
So you
hype
really
song is an
do
Aloe
like
Black.
it. Okay.
Yeah. Right now my hype song is an
Yeah,
Aloe
Aloe
Black
Black.
song. Yeah, Aloe Black. It's called Verge, because I'm on the verge of the rest of my life.
Mm, nice. I like it. Oh, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And if someone wants to continue a conversation with you, how would they best find you?
Oh, Lori, I would love for them to connect with me on LinkedIn, Erica Anderson Rooney. Follow me on Instagram. My handle is at Erica Anderson Rooney, or go to my website. That will take you to everywhere and anywhere I am, which is www.ericaandersonrooney.com.
Awesome. I will put links to all of that in the
Thank you.
show notes. And by the way, that's how Erica and I originally connected, was through LinkedIn.
Yep.
How I connect with all of my best connections.
LinkedIn is where it's at. I'm telling you, it's my favorite
It really
social media
is.
network ever.
Absolutely. Erica, thank you so much for joining me today on Fine is a Four-Letter Word.
Woo, thank you, Lori.